Well, I'll tell you, the American people really need to stop thinking of themselves as Americans. Honestly, this is a mental trap. It's a trick, actually, to make you feel invested in a system that does not invest in you. If you're a part of a so-called minority community, especially, then you only think of yourselves that way because you're an American, or you think of yourself as an American. So you're a minority in American society. But it's a lie if you look at the bigger picture. Obviously, you're not minorities. You're members of the global majority who happen to live in the United States. You're a diaspora community from the global majority. The majority in that country is a global minority. But as long as you think of yourselves as American, well, you will think of yourselves as a minority because you've believed in this society, in this system. You have invested in it, and you believe yourself to be a part of the very society that tells you you don't belong in that society. You see? It would be like inmates in a prison thinking that they're actually part of the staff of the prison administration. Like you aren't incarcerated and abused in that jail, you just work there. Except that the other people who call themselves prison staff get to go home after their shifts while you just get to stay there. You have to stay there in your cell. But you pretend, you imagine that there's some equality between you and the prison guard, between you and the prison staff. That's what it's like if you're a so-called minority in America. You're a prisoner who thinks that he's a guard. But the guards will never hesitate to remind you which one of you has the baton, which one of you has the club, which one of you has the rights, and which one of you has freedom. But even then, you seem to think that the prison works just like seniority at a company or something, as if as a prisoner, the longer you serve, eventually you'll get to be the warden. That's how delusional you are. Doesn't work like that. No, you're not an American and you're not a minority. You're a member of the global majority who just happens to be in the United States. And I'm telling you, this applies whether your so-called minority status is based on race or color or ethnicity, or if it's based on religion, or even if it's based on your economic status, because most of the people on earth are not white, they're not Christian, and they're not rich. So you need to think of yourselves as part of the rest of the people in the world who look like you, who believe like you, and who struggle financially like you. Those are your compatriots, your comrades, your brothers and sisters. That's your nation. If you think of yourselves in any other kind of way, then this is just a tactic for reducing you and cutting you off from the power that comes from numbers. Do you know how foolish it sounds to anyone else, anyone who looks at the totality of the world, when you say something like Asian minorities, black and brown minorities, right? It's absurd. Over 85% of the population on the planet is either Asian or African or Latin American. You think that you're a blade of grass in the desert, but the desert is just a little tiny sandbox in the middle of a field of grass. So don't think of yourselves as minorities in America. Think of yourselves as representing the global majority that encircles that country. So if you can readjust your thinking along these lines, then you might also better understand that as a part of the international majority, you're supposed to redress your grievances to international bodies for justice. And you'll look at the crimes and the violations that are committed against you in that country as breaches of international law, which they are. The same way that there are crimes and violations of international law when that country does the same things overseas, when America does things overseas, because your rights are profoundly violated in that country. And the worst part about it is that the indoctrination system has normalized it for you and has made you think that your only recourse when your rights are violated is to go to the ones who are committing the violations. You know, they cut you off from the international community, from the global majority, and made you think that when, for example, when the police murder innocent members of your community, you're supposed to turn to the police for justice. You're supposed to go to the very security forces that are targeting your community for extrajudicial killings and ask them for justice. No, you're supposed to go to the United Nations. You're supposed to go to the International Criminal Court, to the International Court of Justice. I mean, tell me, why the so-called police officers and the chiefs of police and the police commissioners and so on, all of those police officials who are involved in any extrajudicial killing in the United States, why were they put on trial in Minnesota, in Pennsylvania, Missouri, Texas, or Kansas, or what have you? Why not at The Hague? I mean, you say it's systemic, don't you? You know it's systemic targeting of so-called minority communities. You can't look at the mass incarceration numbers and not know that this is systemic targeting, mass incarceration of members of the global majority in the United States, who are then forced to work as slave labor for private enterprise in prison, often for the rest of their lives. This is systemic population reduction of so-called minority communities through extrajudicial killing and detention. Well, that's nothing but a form of ethnic cleansing. But again, they make you think it's normal. It's not normal. It's criminal. And it's a crime against humanity. It's a violation of international law. And you are members of the international community, whether you realize it or not. Your government, your system, has got you believing that international law doesn't apply to you. Well, why do you suppose they made you think that? Because they don't want you to know that their treatment of you is not normal, that it's not civilized, and that it's not legal. They have you thinking that you have the most rights of any people on earth, the most freedom of any people on earth, and so on. And that's precisely because you don't. You're like an abused spouse who's been browbeat into thinking that you're married to the most wonderful person on earth. Meanwhile, that same person treats you like a monster, treats everyone else like a monster, and is viewed by everyone else as a monster. The mass incarceration, prison industrial complex, ethnic cleansing system is a violation of the International Labor Organization's Convention number 29, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And of course, it's a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is nothing short of modern day slavery. And it's a shame that you don't even know that there are laws higher than the laws of your city, your state, and your federal government that exist to protect you. The same goes for every manifestation of racism, of white supremacy, and every form of discrimination in your country. These are all violations of international law, and you should have redress to that. You know, they just made homelessness illegal in America. Can you imagine that? It's illegal to be homeless, but not illegal to make you homeless. Criminalizing being poor when you are made poor by a criminal system. You're not allowed to not have enough money to pay for your own survival, but they're allowed to make your survival too expensive to pay for. And if you have any blotch on your credit record, why, it may as well be a criminal record. You can't rent, you can't get a job, you can't secure housing, you can't get a car, anything. And they talk about China's social credit system. Well, you invented it. They've got your social security number around your neck like an iron collar. Everybody in that country has debt collectors chasing after them like bloodhounds after an escaped convict. Well, you know, there's something called the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and that's supposed to protect you. But they don't want anyone to know about it. They want you to think that your only recourse is to go to the government for help, when it's that same government that puts you in debt, keeps you in debt, and is itself in debt. The same government that is bought and paid for by the very predatory, parasitic companies that make life too expensive in America, that make it impossible to get an education without drowning in debt for the rest of your life. The same government and the same courts that have taken all the rights and protections away from you and given them to corporations and given them to the super rich. They don't want you to even know about your rights under international law. This is the dual purpose of American exceptionalism. They don't respect international law. They think that they're above the law, and they want you to have that same attitude. But the difference is that you're suffering because of it, because they don't respect international law when it comes to their own people. Do you think that they defy the law everywhere else but adhere to it at home? No. They're criminals outside and they're criminals inside. And the thing that enables them to be that way is their domination of the United Nations. You have as much at stake as the rest of the world does when it comes to the invocation of Article 6. The only difference between you and and America's victims all around the world is that at least they know that they're victims. You think you're privileged. If we can get the U.S. expelled from the UN for their persistent violations of the principles of the UN Charter, I'm telling you, you can't even fathom how different this world could be, how different your own lives can be. The Article 6 campaign is fighting for a day when the United States will be held accountable for its crimes against humanity, both abroad and at home. This measure would be the most decisive blow imaginable to the American tyranny that you and I have been living under and suffering under for our whole lives, and what the whole world has been enduring for as long as anyone can remember. We can foresee a future with the Article 6 campaign in which the United Nations is, once it's liberated from U.S. domination and control, it could actually impose accountability on the United States, something that is practically and procedurally impossible right now, as long as America reigns on the Security Council. We can envision a future where the world unites to impose economic sanctions on America, to cut the empire off at the knees and force it to reckon with the blood they have on their hands. But this struggle isn't only about liberating the oppressed people of the world. No, like I said, it's also about liberating the American people themselves from the chains of corporate tyranny and state oppression. Because the United States is not just a global oppressor, it's an oppressor of its own people. The American people have been deceived, they've been manipulated, and they've been dominated by the private sector, by the corporations that control their government, control their economy, and control their everyday lives. These corporations, these faceless entities of greed, have built their empire on the suffering of the working class, the exploitation of the poor, and on the backs of all of those poor people who believed in the so-called American dream. But it turns out that it wasn't a dream at all. It's a drunken stupor. You're drunk from propaganda and indoctrination, and on top of that, you're punch drunk from enduring the relentless beating that that system has been giving you your whole life. And it's time to sober up. Don't you know that if the UN is allowed to do its job, America can be punished for its actions? America can be sanctioned. And what better punishment could there possibly be for a system that prioritizes profit over everything else? Why, America can't cope if they were sanctioned by major trading partners and by 190 nations on earth. You operate on a trade deficit every year, about $1 trillion worth. That means that you import $1 trillion worth of goods more than you export. And you're importing things that you can't produce yourselves. Yeah, I know it sounds like this is going to make your life harder, but this is a process of struggle and sacrifice that you're going to have to go through to wrestle your way out of corporate domination. With the Article 6 campaign, we can envision a world where the power of these corporations is shattered. When the